his bid to take on Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election. Former Vice President Joe Biden is now the only candidate left vying for the Democratic Party nomination and the chance to campaign against Trump in November. Left-leaning Sanders had a strong lead in the campaign little more than a month ago. But that advantage evaporated in March once the party establishment lined up behind Joe Biden. He's still expected to exceed expectations on the campaign trail with strong fundraising and widespread support from younger demographics. Speaking from Vermont, Sanders said the COVID-19 crisis contributed to his decision to bow out.
But as I see the crisis gripping the nation, exacerbated by a president unwilling or unable to provide any kind of credible leadership, and the work that needs to be done to protect people in this most desperate hour, I cannot, in good conscience, continue to mount a campaign that cannot win and which would interfere with the important work required of all of us in this difficult hour.
Well, for more on this and what it means for the 2020 race, I'm joined by political science professor Thomas Gift, who is in London. Thomas, thanks very much for joining us. Will there now be the possibility for the Democratic Party, especially the faction who is behind Bernie Sanders, to now unite around Joe Biden?
Well, that's certainly what Joe Biden is hoping. And I do think that ultimately Sanders supporters will get behind Biden. Of course, there will be some outliers. Sanders voters don't necessarily feel a strong allegiance always to the Democratic Party. But when it comes to the choice between Biden and Trump, I think a lot of Sanders supporters will turn out and vote Democrat. That will, of course, require that Biden extends an olive branch to Sanders supporters, which, of course, he will be willing to do. He's going to really try to move the party together, say now is the time to unite, to heal wounds, and to come together to beat Donald Trump in 2020.
Now, talking of US President Donald Trump, not even a global pandemic could stop him from reaching for Twitter. And it looks like now he's really tried to stoke the divisive nature between the Democratic Party here.
That's absolutely the case. And of course, from now on, he really is going to try to reach out to some of these Sanders supporters to make the case that he actually represents their values better than what he would refer to as a Democratic establishment party candidate in Joe Biden. Sanders supporters are quite independent-minded. Some of them, in fact, have a relatively populist streak. So it's not implausible that a certain subsection would actually consider voting for Donald Trump. But at the very least, I think Donald Trump is hoping that Sanders supporters maybe won't even show up to the polls when it comes to November. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
But it's not just in the bag for Joe Biden just yet. He's still got to wait a little bit longer before he is the only candidate officially.
That's true, although for all intents and purposes, I think Joe Biden is the presumptive nominee at this point. I mean, he will be anointed that officially at the Democratic National Convention, which will come in a few months. But essentially, all of the fundraisers, all the support, all the endorsements, all the Democratic Party machine are going to be coming behind Joe Biden with the expectation that he's going to be the candidate that will be facing Donald Trump in November.
And just quickly, where do you see things running from here?
Well, I think it's just so early to tell. I mean, a lot can happen between now and November. Of course, we're in the midst of this huge international pandemic with the COVID-19. I think a lot of what happens with the economy, which is contingent on that, will weigh heavily in the election this year. But, a lot can happen in the polls. Right now, if you look at a lot of the head-to-head matchups between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, Joe Biden seems to do well. But we have to remember that Donald Trump isn't in full campaign mode yet. And once he does, I would expect some of these polls to tighten up.
Thomas Gift joining us here from